This video is sponsored by the metalcore band Gold Souls. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA. And would you believe me that back in 2005, when Mariah Carey, 50 Cent, and Ludacris were at the top of the charts, that right there with them, one of the biggest songs of the summer on MTV was a 5-minute long progressive metal epic with a guitar solo that went on for a full 60 seconds? Well, it's true, and that song was Bat Country by Avenged Sevenfold. And today we're here to talk about their album City of Evil and how it changed both their career and the direction of metal in general. It took them from being really just another up-and-coming Warped Tour metalcore band to being one of the biggest bands in their generation of rock, capable of headlining festivals and even sharing the stage with Metallica. They also breathed new life into the guitar scene, which at the time was at a pretty low point. And with their kind of hard partying rock star vibe, I think they were a very much needed counterpoint to the other Warped Tour bands who honestly look like they were about ready to cry half the time. So what is the story of City of Evil? And what is the lasting impact and legacy of this album and of Avenged Sevenfold in general? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. But first, if you haven't, did you know that I have a second channel? It's true, I do. If this is my sort of information channel, I think of my second channel as the entertainment channel. It's a little bit more loose and fun, just kind of like hanging out after a show at Denny's with your friends, BSing about music. So if that sounds cool to you, there's a link to that in the description of this video.
What's up? We're Avenged Sevenfold. We're at TRL today at MTV Studios, playing Bat Country live on TRL, and then we're going to close out the show with Beast and the Harlot.
And to fully understand Avenged Sevenfold and City of Evil, first I need to give you a little bit of context. Avenged Sevenfold started out way back in 1999 in Huntington Beach, California, in the heart of Orange County, and they put out their first album, Sounding the Seventh Trumpet, in 2001. Followed by Waking the Fallen in 2003, which had their first kind of minor breakthrough hit, Unholy Confessions. And the important thing to understand here is that during this era of the band, they were very much perceived as being a quote-unquote emo band. They played Warped Tour in 2000. They were on Hopeless Records with bands like The Queers, Thrice, Guttermouth, and Mustard Plug. And the ultimate sign of emo, they even wore eyeliner in their video.
Punk was my real first love, and then became obsessed with the ethic or the ethos and the wildness of punk rock. So it really was my first love of music that I felt like was mine.
And by the way, if you want to watch my full podcast with M Shadows, there's a link to that in the description of this video. So at the time, they were really seen as much closer to bands like The Used or even Taking Back Sunday than they were to, say, Metallica or Pantera. And back then, especially, those two scenes just really didn't intersect at all. Like, if you were even a little bit emo, you were absolutely, definitely not metal. And with all of that as context, Waking the Fallen ended up selling over 150,000 albums, which got the attention of Warner Brothers, who signed them in 2004.
So we did our record, Waking the Fallen, and then we had a nice fan base, throughout the whole country. Then when Warner Brothers came along, a bunch of major labels came along, but we decided to go with Warner Brothers.
And Warner Brothers absolutely rules. They're the best, and they give us the most freedom.
And so in early 2005, they started working on what would become their major label debut, City of Evil. And Warner Brothers had signed them, kind of hoping that they could hop on the growing metalcore trend. As M Shadows said, they actually wanted us to do a metalcore record because major labels like hopping on the bandwagon. Thrice was signed and Thursday, so Warner Brothers was like, we got to get a band like that. But making a metalcore record is definitely not what Avenged Sevenfold had in mind. They had already moved on from that scene and that sound, and they were drawing influences from bands that were, for lack of a better word, much more metal. As M Shadows later said, with the guitars, our inspiration at that point was, we want to play better than Children of Bodom. That was like the band we were looking up to at that time. We want to fucking play guitar like that, but be an American style band, but have those Euro elements. The other big change they had decided on was to walk away from screaming. And to this day, you oftentimes hear people say that they stopped screaming because Matt blew out his voice, but that's not the case at all. They had just moved on. As their producer Mudrock said,
one thing I see a lot on the internet and I hear a lot about, when I met the band after Sounding the Seventh Trumpet had come out and before they recorded Waking the Fallen, Matt handed me the CD and he said to me, this record's screaming. The record we want to make, which turned out to be Waken the Fallen, is going to be half screaming and half singing. He said, I don't want to scream anymore, but I'm going to make a record that's half screaming, half singing. And the record after that is going to be all singing. They already knew that they wanted to make a record that was all singing by the time City of Evil came out. And all this bullshit about him not being able to scream anymore is it's just not true.
And this was a big decision for them because screaming and breakdowns are really kind of the foundational elements of metalcore. And if they got signed on the basis of being a metalcore band, is this what the label wanted? And beyond that, is this what the fans wanted? This was a big risk for them, especially because metalcore was blowing up at the time. But if all that makes it sound like they were planning to make some sort of a sellout pop album, that was definitely not the case either. In fact, they actually set out to make their most ambitious, progressive, challenging material ever. As M. Shadows said, "We didn't take the easy way. We wrote songs that should never end up on MTV, never ever end up on the radio. Every song was way too long, and we knew that there wasn't going to be any good edits for any of those songs, but we were still like, this is our one big chance." And so they went back into the studio with a producer named Mudrock, who was best known for working with artists like Godsmack, Powerman 5000, and Alice Cooper. Not exactly the first person you would think of to work with a young metalcore band. And the sessions were not easy. As Zachy Vengeance described it, "We were there for 14, 15 hours a day, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, get up and do it again. We went over everything until there was nothing left to give. Fucking exhausted ourselves writing that album. It wasn't a fun experience." And after 2 months in the studio, somehow they made it out alive and released City of Evil in June of 2005 with the lead single Burn It Down. And the reaction to Burn It Down was, well, not that much. The first problem is that the old fans didn't really like this new direction. They wanted more metalcore, and this album just straight up isn't that. I think this review from MTV.com of all places actually sums it up pretty well. City of Evil isn't metalcore, sharing little with extreme metal and nothing with hardcore. Instead, the band has written a jaw-droppingly schizophrenic, meandering, and undeniably tuneful album that sounds like a collision of Metallica, Faith No More, CKY, Guns N' Roses, and Queen. And I think that really hits the nail on the head. There wasn't really a specific subgenre that City of Evil fit into, and it was struggling to find an audience.
Because when that record first came out, our fans on Waking the Fallen were very bummed on it. You know, they were like, this isn't Waking the Fallen 2. This isn't even screaming and singing. This is all singing. Matt's voice has changed. They're doing much more solos. It's much more, over the top. And so we came off with a disappointing first week, or came out of a very disappointing first week, and then basically no traction. The record had dropped all the way off the charts, and it was, we're doing 2,000-3,000 records a week, which at the time is a total failure.
And so they had more or less resigned themselves to the album being a flop, until out of the blue, they got a helping hand that may have saved their entire career from a somewhat unlikely place, which was Good Charlotte.
Benji and Joel were like, we're going to take them on TRL with us and play backcountry on TRL.
And thanks to the power of TRL, they finally got the traction that they were looking for. Bad Country was a certified hit, quickly cracking the Billboard Top 100. They also appeared in Guitar Hero 2 and Rock Band 3, and if you remember how insanely popular these games were at the time, that meant that tens of millions of people all over the world were discovering and actually playing their songs. Basically, they were on a rocket ship. And all of that led up to Avenged Sevenfold winning Best New Artist at the 2006 MTV VMAs, beating, of all people, Chris Brown and Rihanna.
And the winner is... I wonder, how do you say that?
Avenged Sevenfold, Bad Country!
And I just want to pause for a minute to let that sink in. This was the mid-2000s, just the absolute peak of MTV's stranglehold on pop culture. And here is Avenged Sevenfold with their VMA nomination announced by Fergie. They also beat Kelly Clarkson to hit #1 on TRL with Bat Country, a song that's just insanely over the top even by the standards of metal. It's 5 minutes long, with the guitar solo taking up a full minute of that. They took progressive metal to places that it had never been before, and honestly, probably hasn't ever been since.
I'd met people, some of my heroes, but not celebrities at that status. I mean, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was there at the bar. Queen Latifah was there. Fergie was there. I mean, there was the name amongst names.
And in my opinion, the entire album is a masterpiece. It's a really strange mix of like old school Orange County punk like Agent Orange with Pantera and some of that European metal like Children of Bodom. And yet somehow it all makes perfect sense. One thing I also love about the album is the production. This was around the time when, in my opinion, metal bands started to get a little bit too slick and overproduced in a very digital way with a lot of editing and sample replacement of the drums. And this album just sounds incredibly real. It's really amazing to me how this album sounds just massive and over the top, but still super crystal clear, especially all the detail in the drums. And if you've never given this album a really close listen in some nice headphones, you definitely should. Which brings us to the big question. What is City of Evil's lasting impact and influence? First, let's talk about the impact that it had just on the band's career. Aside from obviously putting them on the map as one of the biggest bands of their generation, it also marked their transition from being a Warped Tour band kind of loosely under the punk and hardcore umbrella to being essentially a metal band. And the first big turning point there was when they played the main stage of Ozfest in 2006.
Then it went to Ozfest. We kind of crossed over a little bit and Crazy Horror Stories or whatever, but the Ozfest crowd was great and we didn't really promote it. We were kind of the secret band on Ozfest.
So we're in front of absolutely nobody that would come to see us.
So we wanted to get out there and play in front of new people. And so basically that was what Ozfest was to us, is get out there in front of new people and have to be out there and not have a good crowd response and not have kids that are just going ape shit.
And the second was getting the opportunity to open for Metallica on some European shows, and even joining Metallica on stage to do some covers of classic punk songs by the Misfits and the Ramones. I love how awkward they look on stage, kind of shuffling up there with Metallica, like dad dragging the kids out for a family photo or something.
You guys sing some backup vocals for us, and you can sing too, all right? Avenged Sevenfold, yes.
And these shows actually changed the band a lot because they realized that for as great as the City of Evil material was, and how that just over-the-top onslaught of chaos sounded really cool on a CD, it didn't necessarily translate into these kind of shows. As M Shadows described their Ozfest experience, on that record we're just playing a million miles a minute and it's just getting lost. And then you have Disturbed come on and we're like, dude, this projects, this groove. And we're just like, dude, we're a speed metal band going on with these guys. No one's gonna get this. And they had the same experience on the Metallica shows, which made them take a little bit of a different approach on their follow-up self-titled album, where they took things in a much more stripped-down, groove-based kind of direction.
And it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the record. We're still Avenged Sevenfold, but this is a very much more groove-oriented, groove-based record.
And if you listen to songs like Critical Acclaim, Scream, or Afterlife, you can hear it. It's still Avenged, it's still got those over-the-top guitars and drums, but those are all songs that would translate much better in that outdoor festival kind of environment than City of Evil did, and kind of paved the way for the direction of future stuff like Hail to the King, which took that to the extreme. And with that, they basically said goodbye to the Warped Tour scene. From then on, they've been much more aligned with what I would call like the rock festival kind of crowd, touring with bands like Disturbed, Volbeat, and Five Finger Death Punch. And also, City of Evil was probably the last time that we heard this kind of music with such a heavy emphasis on guitars in the mainstream. There were certainly other big guitar bands, for example, all the emo stuff like Paramore and MCR and all that. But as far as bands with like over-the-top, really flashy lead guitars, Avenged was sort of the last of their kind. We also have to talk about the Rev, who, in my opinion, was an absolutely amazing drummer, like so creative, so much feel, rest in peace. And personally, I would consider this a progressive metal album in the sense that, it doesn't necessarily sound like Dream Theater, but it's progressive in the sense that it is super experimental and technical with basically complete disregard for conventional song structures or anything like that, which would probably make them the second most popular progressive metal band of all time after Tool.
I think that we have the greatest fucking players in the world.
And I'm not going to say that Avenged Sevenfold saved guitar or anything like that, because I don't think it's that dramatic, but I do think they played a non-trivial role in bringing the guitar scene back to life. If you look at where guitar was at back in the mid-2000s, there really weren't a lot of like young new bands keeping it alive, unlike today where we've got tons and tons. That was sort of a low point for guitar, and they were one of the only bands in that generation to get respect from the guitar magazines and the old guard of players who sort of grew up in the Metallica era, era, because honestly, their talent is just undeniable. And I think if you talk to a lot of guitarists in sort of younger up and coming metal bands now, I think a lot of them will tell you that Avenged Sevenfold is the band that made them want to start playing guitar. And so just to wrap all of this up, as you can probably tell, I personally consider City of Evil to be an absolute modern day classic. In my personal opinion, it's one of the very best metal albums of all time, right up there with anything that Pantera or Guns N' Roses has done. To me, it's honestly that good. And it also kicked off their 3-album run of City of Evil, Self-Titled, and Nightmare, which I think is pretty much untouchable. You can debate which of those 3 albums is the best, and I think any of them could be a valid choice, which I think really says everything about how strong that run was. Either way, City of Evil is the album that changed everything for them, and if you haven't given it a serious listen, now would be a great time to do just that. But before I go, let's check out Gold Souls. This is Walk the Other Way featuring Ryo Kinoshita, formerly of Crystal Lake. And this one is called Eyes on Fire. And if you want to hear more from Gold Souls, you can check them out on YouTube and Spotify. Just hit the links in the description of this video. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. And I would like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get access to all my videos and podcasts early. I do giveaways. There are also members-only VIP channels on my Discord that I'm super active in. And there is also a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool, just hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.